If you don't want to go to a nursing home, then get a job, my son said while I was making dinner. I just smiled and packed my bags. Minutes later, a luxury car pulled up to take me away. It was my new wealthy boyfriend. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. I stirred the beef stew one last time, watching the steam rise from the pot like my own exhausted breath. The kitchen smelled of home-cooked comfort, but there was nothing comforting about the tension hanging in the air. I'd been living in Paul's house for 3 years now, ever since I sold my own place to help them with their mortgage. 3 years of cooking, cleaning, and watching my grandchildren while being treated like hired help. "Mom, this stew tastes bland," Paul called from the dining room, not even bothering to come to the kitchen. "Didn't you season it?" I closed my eyes and counted to 5 the way I'd learned to do. "I'll bring some salt," I replied, my voice steady despite the familiar sting in my chest. Sandra, my daughter-in-law, laughed that sharp little laugh of hers. Maybe her taste buds are going bad. You know how old people lose their senses. I ladled the stew into their bowls, my hands trembling slightly. Not from age, but from the effort it took to keep quiet. I'd raised Paul better than this, hadn't I? Where was the boy who used to hug my legs and tell me I made the best cookies in the world? "Grandma Janice, I like your stew," little Emma whispered as I set her bowl down. She was only 6, but she already understood the house dynamics better than the adults. "Thank you, sweetheart," I murmured, smoothing her hair. "Don't encourage her, Emma," Sandra snapped. "She needs to learn to cook properly if she's going to live here." I returned to the kitchen and gripped the counter edge. 67 years old, and I was being lectured about cooking by a woman who couldn't boil water when she married my son. I'd been supporting this household financially and domestically since moving in, yet somehow I was the burden. The dishes clattered as I began cleaning up. Through the doorway I could hear them discussing their weekend plans. A spa day for Sandra, golf for Paul. No mention of who would watch the children or handle the grocery shopping. That would be me, of course. "Mom!" Paul's voice cut through my thoughts. "Can you come here?" I dried my hands and walked to the dining room, where Paul sat with his arms crossed, Sandra beside him with that smug expression she wore during their interventions. "We need to talk," Paul said, not looking at me directly. "This arrangement isn't working anymore." My heart began to race, but I kept my face neutral. "What arrangement?" "You living here," Sandra said bluntly. "It's becoming a strain on our marriage." I looked at my son, searching for any trace of the boy I'd raised alone after his father died. "Paul." He finally met my eyes, and what I saw there broke something inside me. Irritation. Resentment. Like I was a problem to be solved rather than his mother. "Look, Mom, you're getting older. You need more care than we can provide. And honestly," he paused, glancing at Sandra for support, "if you're not going to contribute financially anymore, maybe it's time to consider other options." "Other options?" "A retirement home," Sandra said sweetly. "There are lovely places with people your own age." The room fell silent except for the sound of little Tommy dropping his spoon. I felt something shift inside me, like a door closing on one life and opening to another. "Or," Paul continued, his voice gaining confidence, "if you don't want to go to a nursing home, then you need to get a job. Start paying rent like everyone else." Sandra nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. If you want to live here, you need to earn your keep." I stared at them both, these people I'd sacrificed everything for. The mortgage money, the babysitting, the cooking, the cleaning, none of it mattered. In their eyes, I was just an old woman taking up space. "So what's it going to be, Mom?" Paul asked impatiently. "Job or nursing home?" I smiled then, really smiled for the first time in months. It must have unsettled them because Sandra shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "I'll let you know," I said calmly. I walked upstairs to my small room, the one that used to be Paul's childhood bedroom, and pulled my old suitcase from the closet. As I folded my clothes, I could hear them downstairs discussing my options, as if I weren't a real person with feelings. But they had no idea what was coming. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized by heart. "Marcus? It's Janice. I think it's time." 20 minutes later, I heard the soft purr of an expensive engine in the driveway. I peeked through the bedroom curtains and saw a sleek black Mercedes pulling up to the curb. My heart fluttered with anticipation and something I hadn't felt in years. Excitement about my future. "Mom, who's that?" Paul's voice carried up from downstairs, confused and slightly alarmed. I didn't answer. Instead, I took one last look around the room that had been my prison for 3 years. The single bed with its worn quilt, the small dresser where I kept my few remaining possessions, the window that faced the neighbor's fence instead of anything beautiful. I wouldn't miss any of it. The doorbell rang as I descended the stairs with my suitcase. Paul stood frozen in the hallway, Sandra peeking out from behind him like a curious child. Through the glass door, we could all see the tall, distinguished figure of Marcus Whitmore. "Are you expecting someone, Mom?" Paul asked, his voice tight with suspicion. I smoothed my cardigan and checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. For the first time in months, I liked what I saw. "Yes, I am." I opened the door, and Marcus smiled at me with those kind gray eyes that had captured my attention 6 months ago at the community center's painting class. He was 72, recently widowed like me, and had the gentle manners of a man who'd been raised right. "Good evening, Janice," he said warmly, then nodded politely toward Paul and Sandra. "I'm Marcus Whitmore." Paul's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Sandra's eyes widened as she took in Marcus's perfectly tailored coat, his confident posture, and the obvious quality of everything about him. "I'm sorry, who are you exactly?" Paul managed to ask. Marcus looked at me with a raised eyebrow, and I nodded. It was time. "I'm Janice's friend," Marcus said simply. "She called and asked if I could give her a ride." "A ride where?" Sandra demanded, her voice shrill. I turned to face them both, feeling stronger than I had in years. "To my new home." The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear their minds racing, trying to process what was happening. "New home," Paul repeated weakly. "Marcus has been kind enough to offer me a place to stay," I said, enjoying the shocked expressions on their faces. "We met at the painting class I've been attending on Tuesday evenings." "Painting class?" Sandra's voice cracked. "What painting class?" I'd never mentioned it because they'd never asked what I did with my time when I wasn't serving them. For 6 months, I'd been rediscovering parts of myself I thought were lost forever. And in the process, I'd found something beautiful and unexpected. "Janice is incredibly talented," Marcus said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "Her watercolors are extraordinary. In fact, that's how we started talking. I was mesmerized by a landscape she was working on." Paul looked like he'd been slapped. "You paint?" "I used to," I said quietly. "Before your father died. Before I spent all my time taking care of everyone else." Marcus stepped closer to me, not touching but offering his presence as support. "When Janice told me about her living situation, I offered her my guest room. My house is far too large for one person, and I'd welcome the company." "Guest room?" Sandra's voice rose to a squeak. I felt heat creep up my neck, but Marcus's calm presence steadied me. We hadn't discussed the details of our arrangement yet, but I knew he was being diplomatic for my son's sake. "Marcus has been a wonderful friend," I said carefully. "He's shown me more kindness in 6 months than—" I stopped myself before I said something I couldn't take back. But Paul heard what I didn't say. His face flushed red. "More kindness than what, Mom?" I picked up my suitcase, surprised by how light it felt. "More kindness than I've felt in this house in 3 years." "Now wait just a minute," Paul started, his voice rising. "You can't just leave with some stranger." "Marcus isn't a stranger," I said firmly. "He's a retired businessman who treats me with respect and values my company. Something that's been in short supply around here." Sandra found her voice again. "But what about the children? Who's going to watch them?" I almost laughed at the audacity. "I imagine their parents will figure it out." Marcus cleared his throat gently. "Perhaps we should go, Janice. You've had a long day." I nodded, feeling a weight lifting from my shoulders with each step toward the door. "Mom, you can't be serious about this," Paul called after me, desperation creeping into his voice. I paused at the threshold and turned back one last time. "You gave me 2 choices, Paul. A job or a nursing home. But you forgot there was a third option." "Which is?" I smiled, and for the first time in years it reached my eyes. "Living my own life on my own terms." As Marcus helped me into his warm, luxurious car, I caught a glimpse of Paul and Sandra standing in the doorway, their faces pale with shock. They still had no idea what they'd lost. But they were about to find out. Marcus's house took my breath away. Not because it was grand, though it certainly was elegant, but because it felt like home the moment I stepped inside. Warm hardwood floors gleamed under soft lighting, and original artwork hung on cream-colored walls. Fresh flowers sat in a crystal vase on the entrance table, and everything smelled of lemon polish and contentment. "The guest room is upstairs," Marcus said, carrying my suitcase. "It has its own bathroom and a lovely view of the garden." I followed him up the curved staircase, my fingers trailing along the smooth banister. The guest room was larger than the living room at Paul's house, with a queen-sized bed covered in soft blue linens and French doors that opened onto a small balcony. "Marcus, this is beautiful, but I can't possibly." "You can and you will," he said firmly but kindly. "Janice, I've been rattling around this house alone for 2 years since Eleanor passed. Having you here isn't charity. It's a gift to me. That first night I slept better than I had in months. No crying babies waking me at dawn. No Sandra's voice carrying through thin walls as she complained about my existence. Just silence and peace and the knowledge that I was wanted here." The next morning, Marcus made coffee and scrambled eggs while I sat at his kitchen island, watching him move around the spacious room with practiced ease. "You don't have to cook for me," I protested. "I'm perfectly capable." "I know you are," he said, sliding a plate toward me. "But I enjoy cooking when I have someone to cook for. It's been a long time since I've had that pleasure." Over breakfast, my phone buzzed constantly. Paul's name flashed on the screen again and again, but I'd turned off the sound. Marcus noticed my glances toward the phone but didn't comment. "Would you like to see my studio today?" he asked instead. "I have a small art room set up in the sunroom. I thought you might enjoy painting there." My heart fluttered. "You paint too?" "Terribly," he laughed. "But I enjoy it. Eleanor used to say I painted like a colorblind elephant, but she hung my attempts on the refrigerator anyway." The studio was perfect. Floor-to-ceiling windows filled the space with natural light. An easel stood ready with fresh canvases. I hadn't touched a brush in over 3 years, but my fingers itched to create again. "Marcus, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let me watch you work," he said simply. "I've been curious about your technique since that first day at the community center." Meanwhile, back at Paul's house, chaos was unfolding. I learned this later, of course, but Sandra called her sister that very first morning, her voice shrill with panic. "She just left, Karen. Walked out with some strange man and abandoned us." Paul had tried calling me 17 times before noon. When I finally answered, his voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Mom, what the hell do you think you're doing?" "Living my life," I said calmly, admiring the way sunlight streamed through Marcus's kitchen windows. "With some man you barely know? Mom, this is crazy. You could be in danger." I almost laughed. "The only danger I've been in was losing myself completely in that house of yours. That's not fair. We took you in when you had nowhere else to go. Paul, I sold my house to help you avoid foreclosure. I didn't have nowhere to go. I gave up somewhere to go so you could keep your somewhere." Silence stretched between us. I could hear Emma crying in the background, and Sandra's voice rising as she tried to manage both children without my help. "Mom, please. Just come home. We can work this out." "I am home," I said softly. "For the first time in years, I'm actually home." I hung up and turned to find Marcus watching me with concern. "Second thoughts?" he asked gently. I shook my head. "Not a single one." That afternoon we walked through his neighborhood, tree-lined streets where people said hello and meant it, where gardens bloomed with obvious care and attention. Marcus introduced me to his neighbors as his friend Janice, and they welcomed me with genuine warmth. "You seem lighter," Mrs. Henderson from next door observed. "Like a weight's been lifted." She had no idea how right she was. That evening, as we sat on his back patio watching the sunset paint the sky in watercolor shades, my phone buzzed with a text from Sandra. "The kids are asking where Grandma went. What am I supposed to tell them?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then showed it to Marcus. "What do you want to tell them?" he asked. "The truth," I said. "That Grandma finally learned she deserved better." For the first time in 3 years, I went to bed feeling valued, respected, and genuinely cared for. But I knew this was just the beginning. Paul and Sandra weren't going to give up that easily. They'd tasted life without their live-in housekeeper and babysitter, and they weren't going to like the flavor. By the end of my first week at Marcus's house, Paul's world was crumbling. I didn't witness it firsthand, but the evidence came through a series of increasingly frantic phone calls and text messages that painted a clear picture of domestic disaster. It started with Sandra's meltdown on day 3. I was in Marcus's garden, deadheading roses and feeling more peaceful than I had in years, when my phone rang. "Janice." Sandra's voice was shrill with desperation. "You have to come back. I can't handle both kids by myself." I almost reminded her that they were her children but bit my tongue. "Where's Paul?" "Working late again. He's been staying at the office until 8 or 9 every night since you left. Claims he has projects, but I think he's avoiding the chaos here." Through the phone, I could hear Emma crying and Tommy having what sounded like a spectacular tantrum. "Sandra, you're their mother. You need to figure this out." "But I've never." Her voice cracked. "Janice, I don't know how to do this alone. You always handled everything." And there it was, the admission I'd been waiting 3 years to hear. I'd been doing the work of 2 parents while they played house. "You'll learn," I said gently but firmly, "the same way every other parent does." That night, Paul called at 11 p.m., his voice exhausted and strained. "Mom, please. Just come back for a few days while we figure things out. Sandra's threatening to take the kids to her mother's." "Maybe that would be good for everyone," I suggested. "You don't understand. If she leaves, she's talking about divorce. She says I tricked her into marriage by not telling her what having kids would really be like." I almost laughed at the irony. "Paul, what did you think having children meant?" I thought it would be like when I was growing up. You made it look so easy." "It wasn't easy. I just didn't have a choice but to make it work." The calls continued. By day 5, Paul was calling during his lunch breaks, his voice increasingly desperate. "The house is a disaster, Mom. There are toys everywhere, dishes piled up, and neither kid has had a proper meal since you left. Emma keeps asking when Grandma's coming home." My heart ached for my grandchildren, but I steeled myself. "Paul, you're a grown man with 2 graduate degrees. You can learn to run a washing machine and cook a simple meal." "It's not that simple." "It was simple enough when you expected me to do it all for free." Meanwhile, Sandra had started calling her friends, painting herself as the victim of an unstable mother-in-law who'd abandoned her family. But the narrative wasn't working the way she'd hoped. "Wait," I heard her friend Melissa say during one call that Sandra put on speaker. "Wasn't Janice basically your live-in nanny and housekeeper? For free?" "That's not. She lived here too. She got free room and board. In exchange for raising your kids and maintaining your house?" "Sandra, that's not free room and board. That's exploitation." Sandra hung up on her. By the second week, Paul had hired a babysitter who quit after 2 days, tried a house cleaning service that cost more than his car payment, and ordered takeout so often that his credit card company called to verify the charges weren't fraudulent. "This is unsustainable, Mom," he said during his daily check-in call. "I'm hemorrhaging money and Sandra's having panic attacks every morning before I leave for work." "Maybe it's time to have a family meeting," I suggested. "Figure out how to distribute responsibilities fairly." "You mean come back?" "I mean figure out how to be a family without relying on an unpaid servant." The breaking point came during week 3. Paul showed up at Marcus's house unannounced, looking haggard and desperate. Marcus answered the door with his usual polite dignity. "Good evening. You must be Paul." "I'm Marcus Whitmore." Paul brushed past him rudely. "Where's my mother?" I emerged from the kitchen where I'd been helping Marcus prepare dinner. A wonderful salmon dish with herbs from his garden. Paul's eyes took in the elegant dining room, the fresh flowers, my relaxed demeanor. "Mom, you have to stop this nonsense and come home." "I am home, Paul." "No, you're not. You're living with some stranger, playing house like a teenager." Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "I think you should lower your voice when speaking to your mother in my home." Paul's face flushed red. "And I think you should mind your own business, old man." The disrespect in his tone made my blood boil. "Paul Christopher, you will not speak to Marcus that way. Not in his house, not anywhere. So you're choosing him over your own family?" I looked at my son, really looked at him. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, his eyes wild with the kind of desperation that comes from finally facing reality. I'm choosing myself, Paul. For the first time in my adult life, I'm choosing what makes me happy instead of what makes everyone else comfortable. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. Fear. Real genuine fear that he'd pushed too far and lost something irreplaceable. But pride still held his tongue, and he turned and walked out without another word. That night, Marcus found me crying quietly in the garden. Second thoughts? He asked gently. No, I whispered. I'm just grieving the son I thought I raised. It had been 6 weeks since I left Paul's house, and I was finally beginning to believe that my new life was real. Marcus and I had fallen into a comfortable routine morning coffee together, afternoons in the studio where my painting was flourishing, and evenings that often stretched late into the night as we talked about everything and nothing. I just finished a watercolor of his garden when my phone rang. Paul's name appeared on the screen, but this time something in my gut told me to answer. Mom. His voice was different, smaller, broken in a way that reminded me of the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Paul, what's wrong? Can you meet me somewhere? Please. I need to talk to you. There was something in his tone that made my maternal instincts override my anger. Where? The park on Maple Street, where I used to play as a kid. In an hour. I found him sitting on the same bench where I used to watch him on the playground 25 years ago. His shoulders were slumped, his face drawn with exhaustion. When he looked up at me, I saw tears in his eyes. Mom, I'm sorry. The words came out in a rush. I'm so sorry. I sat down beside him, maintaining some distance but close enough to see the genuine anguish on his face. I didn't know, he continued, his voice breaking. I didn't know how much you did, how much you sacrificed. I thought taking care of family was just what you did because you wanted to. I did want to help Paul, but I also wanted to be valued for it. He nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Sandra left 3 days ago. Took the kids to her mother's in Portland. She said she can't handle being a real mother, and she blamed me for not warning her that marriage and kids would be actual work. My heart ached for my grandchildren, but I kept my voice steady. And I realized that in 35 years I never once said thank you. Not really. Not for staying up all night when I had pneumonia, not for working 2 jobs to pay for my college, not for giving up your house to save mine. I took everything and gave nothing back. I felt tears welling up in my own eyes, but I blinked them away. Paul. I called every nursing home in the state looking for you, he said with a bitter laugh. Spent 3 weeks convinced you were hiding somewhere, angry and alone. Then Mrs. Peterson from our old neighborhood saw you at the farmer's market with Marcus. She said you looked happy, really happy, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen you smile like that. We sat in silence for a moment, watching a young mother push her toddler on the swings. I thought about all the times I'd brought Paul here, all the scraped knees I'd kissed and tears I'd dried. She's going to file for divorce, Paul said quietly. Sandra. She says I'm not the man she married, but the truth is I am exactly the man she married. A spoiled, selfish person who expected everyone else to handle the hard parts of life. Paul, you're not. Yes, I am, Mom. And the worst part is I learned it from watching Dad. That hit me like a physical blow. Paul's father had been a good man in many ways, but he'd also expected me to handle everything domestic while he focused on his career. I don't want to be him, Paul continued. I don't want my kids to grow up thinking that's what marriage looks like. But I don't know how to change. Change is possible, I said carefully, but it has to come from you wanting it, not from me fixing it for you. He turned to look at me fully for the first time. I know I have no right to ask this, but would you consider? Could you maybe help me learn? Not move back, not be my unpaid housekeeper again, but just help me figure out how to be the father I should have been all along. I studied my son's face, searching for signs of manipulation or false promises. But all I saw was genuine remorse and a desperate desire to do better. What about Marcus? I asked. Paul's face reddened slightly. I owe him an apology too. A big one. Mom, are you in love with him? The question caught me off guard, but I realized the answer came easily. Yes, I think I am. Then I'm happy for you. You deserve someone who treats you the way he does. And how is that? Like you matter. Like you're precious. His voice cracked again. The way I should have treated you. As we sat there together, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, that would take time. But hope. Hope that my son might finally be ready to become the man I'd always believed he could be. If Sandra comes back, if you get your family together, it won't be the same as before, I warned him. I won't be your safety net anymore. I know. And I don't want you to be. I want you to be my mother. And I want to be your son. The kind of son you can be proud of. We talked for another hour as the sun began to set. When we finally stood to leave, Paul hesitated. Mom? Could I hug you? I opened my arms and held my broken, repentant son while he cried against my shoulder. It felt like the first real embrace we'd shared in years. 6 months later, I stood in Marcus's garden wearing a simple cream-colored dress, watching our small gathering of friends and neighbors take their seats on the white wooden chairs he'd arranged under the oak tree. It wasn't the wedding I'd imagined as a young woman, but at 67, I'd learned that life's best gifts rarely come in the packages we expect. Paul sat in the front row with Emma and Tommy, who'd been staying with him every other weekend since Sandra moved back from Portland. Their divorce had been finalized 2 months ago, and while it was painful for everyone, especially the children, Paul was slowly learning to be a real father. He'd kept his word about changing. The first month had been rocky. He'd called me almost daily for advice about everything from grocery shopping to bedtime routines. But I'd stuck to my boundaries, offering guidance without taking over the tasks. Mom, Emma won't eat anything but chicken nuggets, he'd complained during one particularly frazzled phone call. Then I guess she'll be hungry until she decides to try something else, I'd replied calmly. But what if she starves? Paul, no child has ever starved to death in a house full of food. Stop negotiating with a 6-year-old. Slowly, painfully, he'd learned. The house wasn't always spotless, and sometimes the kids had cereal for dinner, but they were his mistakes to make and learn from. Sandra had surprised everyone by taking a job as a receptionist at a dental office. She'd discovered that having to support herself financially had given her a sense of independence she'd never experienced. They were working toward a more cooperative co-parenting relationship, though it would take time. Grandma Janice looks pretty, Emma whispered loudly, making the guests chuckle. I smiled at her and then turned to Marcus, who stood beside me in his navy suit, his eyes bright with love and contentment. We'd talked extensively about marriage, taking our time to make sure we weren't just two lonely people settling for companionship. Are you sure about this? I'd asked him just last week. Taking on a woman with complicated family dynamics and grandchildren who come with baggage? Janice, he'd said, taking my hands in his. You're not taking on anything. You're gaining a partner who loves you exactly as you are, complications, family, and all. The minister, a kind woman from the community center where we'd met, began the simple ceremony. As she spoke about love that comes later in life, about second chances and new beginnings, I caught Paul's eye. He was smiling through tears, and I could see genuine happiness for me in his expression. After we exchanged vows, Marcus and I hosted a small reception in his backyard. Paul approached me as I was cutting the cake. A simple lemon cake that Marcus had insisted on making himself. Mom, I have something for you, he said, pulling a small wrapped box from his jacket pocket. Inside was a delicate silver locket, clearly vintage and well-loved. It was Grandma Rose's, he said softly. I found it when I was cleaning out the attic last month. I thought you should have it. My mother's locket. I'd wondered what had happened to it after she died. Paul, this is beautiful, but please, let me do this. Let me give you something instead of taking for once. As he fastened the chain around my neck, he whispered, I love you, Mom, and I'm proud of you for choosing happiness. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and the dishes were done, Marcus and I sat on the porch swing, watching the fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Any regrets? He asked, his arm around my shoulders. I thought about the question seriously. Did I regret the years of sacrifice, the thankless service, the gradual erosion of my own identity? Or did I regret finally saying enough? No regrets, I said firmly. Every choice led me here, to this moment, to you. Even the painful ones? Especially the painful ones. They taught me what I was worth. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Grandma Janice, can we come visit you and Mr. Marcus next weekend? Daddy says he'll bring us if you want us to come. I showed the message to Marcus, who smiled. What should we tell her? Yes, I said without hesitation. But they'll follow our house rules, and they'll treat you with respect. Our house rules, Marcus repeated with satisfaction. I liked the sound of that. As we rocked gently in the swing, I marveled at how different my life had become. A year ago, I'd been a woman who believed her worth was measured by her usefulness to others. Now I was a wife again, a grandmother who was loved rather than exploited, and an artist whose paintings were starting to sell at the local gallery. I'd learned that it's never too late to choose yourself, that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary, and that sometimes the people who love you most are the ones you haven't met yet. Paul had his own journey ahead of him, learning to be both mother and father to his children, learning to value the people in his life instead of using them. But that was his path to walk. Mine led here, to this porch, to this man who saw me as precious, to this life where I was cherished rather than tolerated. At 67, I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. You teach people how to treat you. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for everyone involved is to stop accepting treatment that diminishes your soul. The fireflies blinked their ancient code in the darkness, and I was finally truly home.